Hi, this is author Leslie Montgomery, and welcome to Truth and Grace. Sex is a gift from God. Well, how many times have you heard that over the years? And once again, let's be honest. How many of you are rolling your eyes? Well, this is the second podcast we are doing on the wonderful book, The Great Sex Rescue. Today, we have Rebecca Gregoire Lindenback. She's a psychology graduate, and she's Sheila's daughter, who is the co-author of The Great Sex Rescue. Joanna Sawaski is also the co-author. We had the three of these ladies on our program the other day, and we talked at length about the book. And it was such an intriguing conversation. We asked Rebecca to come back and join us. And so here we are. We're going to talk about the book some more. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for having me back. Very excited.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you with us. We had quite the conversation, didn't we?
Yeah, it's always quite the conversation whenever we bring up this book. I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, it's not very often you can have such a blunt conversation about the topic. And speaking of which, let me just put a disclaimer, of course, with the book called The Great Sex Rescue. Of course, we're going to talk about sex and all things related. So if you have little ears around, put the conversation or put the interview on pause and listen to it later when you don't have them around. But you definitely want to listen to it. And we are going to be giving another 5 copies of the book away today. So hit that subscribe button or go to my website, www.authorlesliemontgomery.com. Hit the articles tab and sign up to read a copy, get a copy. But don't wait to win it. Buy a copy today. It's worth it. Go to Amazon.com, buy your copy. Trust me, this is the book of the decade. That's my opinion.
Wow.
It's going to be a bestseller for sure.
That's the hope.
Yeah, let me tell you, it's going to be liberating for women. So we covered a lot of issues, but one of the great things about this book is that it uncovers a lot of bestsellers that have been out, for 30, 40 years?
Some of them even longer. Yeah, we talked about the bestsellers today. So we looked at, we looked at the Amazon rankings, and we studied them over a period of time to see what was kind of the solid bestsellers that weren't new releases in the Christian marriage market. And then we also looked at some of the culture forming books from earlier, like the ones that were out in the 70s, where a lot of people who are pastors today and giving sermons on sex, that may be where they got their main sexual education. Right. So that's what we looked at. We looked at the bestsellers today, and then we looked at 6 culture forming books.
Right. And it was really shocking to me to find out what these books were. And I was kind of vague the other day when we were doing the interview. I was kind of like, well, I don't want to call anybody out on it. And you guys mentioned a couple of books, but today I'm a little bit bolder. So I want to talk about some of what these books were and who the authors are and quote from them, because I feel like, a lot of my listeners who have been following my books and following my radio show for many years, I think you need to hear some of these stories. I think you'll relate to them and you will find freedom in what Rebecca has to say. So I'm going to give some examples today and hear what Rebecca has to say in response. So on page 27, The Act of Marriage, which is the go-to book for Generation X couples, which sold, I might add, over 2.5 million copies. It was written by Tim LaHaye. Tells the story of a couple named Bill and Susie. Bill had, this is what I'm quoting from the book, Bill had always treated Susie like a sex object, ignoring her boundaries when they were dating and doing things even when she asked him not to. Susie felt disrespected and invisible. Yet, okay, now they're quoting, the authors of The Great Sex Rescue, which are Rebecca, her mother, Sheila, and friend, who is a statistician, Joanna Sawaski, are quoting Tim LaHaye. Okay, so Susie felt disrespected and invisible, yet the answer from Tim LaHaye, realized that Bill needed sex. Susie had 3 problems. She did not like sexual relations. She did not understand Bill's needs, and she was more interested in herself than in her husband. When she confessed her sin of selfishness and learned what loving really meant to him, it changed her bedroom life.
Yeah. And I hope that people can see the red flags in that,
Yeah, so
right?
Susie had 3 problems, but Bill had none.
Yeah, my mom was my mom wrote that line. Yep, Susie had 3 problems, but apparently Bill had none.
Yeah.
Exactly. And obviously, as we're talking about these books, it's like what you were saying earlier, it is hard to call people out, right? Because of course, Tim LaHaye didn't mean to imply that a man who has a history of ignoring sexual boundaries is in the right. I'm sure he didn't mean to imply that, women should just understand that men are going to take sexually what they want and it's their job to provide it. But that is the message of that story. And this is why we're talking about these books. We need to recognize that intention does not outweigh impact, right? What we intend to say, the message we intend to give, if that's not the message people end up having from our books, as authors, we need to look inwards and ask, did I communicate this wrong? Because because we're going to be talking about a lot of authors here in this interview, I'm sure. So let's be very clear. None of us who wrote The Great Sex Rescue think that any of these authors set out trying to cause harm. They spread a lot of lies about sex, about marriage, about boundaries, and frankly, about consent.
Yes.
And I don't think they meant to. I really don't think they meant to. But unless we are able to be bold and speak up and say, hey, Bill was not respectful of Susie's sexual boundaries and systematically broke down her ability to consent. And it is not Susie's job to learn to give into his every sexual whim as a way to fix their marriage. Like, unless we start saying things like that, this kind of teaching will keep going unchecked. And that's not a personal attack on the author, but it is an attack on the teaching. And our goal with all this is that the authors actually work with us to help dispel these harmful teachings. And that their platforms actually grow larger as a result of dispelling their previous harmful stuff.
Amen.
I think that will be a really, really great way moving forward.
That's such a great attitude. And I have to tell you, I've known the Lord for 27 years now. And there are things that I said, of course, about the Lord 25 years ago, 20 years ago, that I go, I've been writing for 27 years and I go, I wish I hadn't have said that because I wasn't very mature in Christ, and I wish I could take that back. Or, you write stuff today on the internet, or you write in the book and it's out there, you can't change it.
Totally.
And so, or you're right. You have to be humble enough to go, hey, that was wrong. I've come to a new understanding, that's
and
not
frankly,
clear.
That's the difference between calling for, and that's the difference between calling for perfection and calling for growth.
Right.
And what we hope our book does is calls for growth. It's okay if we didn't have it all right 10 years ago.
Right.
We don't have it all right today. But what's not okay is to stubbornly dig in our heels and refuse to listen to people who've been harmed by our false teachings.
Right. And I want to point out that one of the reasons Rebecca and I talked before the program, okay? And one of the reasons we're talking about these books today, one of the reasons we're talking about this show, these examples today, is because I know who my listeners are, okay? A lot of you I have been ministering to with my radio show and my books for many, many years need to hear these stories, right? I mean, I know you need to hear these examples, all right? So let's hear another example from the same book. LaHaye tells the story of a woman who had pulled away from sex with her stern disciplinarian husband. LaHaye reports that the wife admitted, his awful beatings of our children made me ill. Their 19-year-old son had cut off contact and went to live in a commune to get away from his father. But the solution, LaHaye suggested, that the wife repent and give herself sexually to her physically abusive husband, who had stolen her relationship with her children from her. Again and again, these books, not just LaHaye's books, and others, when women have had legitimate emotional and physical safety needs from their marriages that weren't being met, they are told that having sex will fix things.
Yeah. And how many women have been told that, right? They go to their pastors, they go to even well-meaning counselors sometimes, they go to friends, they go to family, and they say, I'm so alone. I'm married, but I'm so alone.
Mhm.
He doesn't see me, right? I'm not appreciated. I'm not noticed. I just feel like he just wants stuff from me, but he doesn't see me. And what are they told? Well, are you having enough sex?
Yeah, right. And we
And
buy into that, don't we? We just
yeah,
think, and one of the lies I think that women often believe is, and I'm telling you, I grew up, I didn't become a believer until I was almost 26, and I grew up in a home like this. My mom, and she pushed this belief on me, is that if you have sex, your husband won't cheat on you.
yeah.
And yet my dad still cheated on her,
Hmm.
and I believe that, if you just don't say no, your husband won't cheat on you. And the
Exactly.
bottom line is that's just not true.
No,
You
it's
can't
not,
control somebody
because
else's behavior.
you can't. And it's not that. I think that as human beings, and we see this all throughout scripture too, right? This is what Jesus came to earth to correct. We like to substitute nuance with lists of rules,
Mm-hmm.
right? We don't like gray area. Gray area is iffy,
Yeah.
right? This idea that maybe there's just overall bad dynamics in a marriage that have allowed, for this person to continuously just act disrespectful towards his wife, and has caused her to more and more retreat into herself instead of
Mm-hmm.
both them actually communicating. That's too messy. That's messy. We don't
Right.
actually talk about that. Instead, it's, have you had sex 3 times this week? Because
Right.
that's a rule that we can
Right.
follow. If you're
Right.
having sex every 72 hours, every
Right.
47.24 hours, whatever it is for your husband in particular, he won't have an affair. He will help with the children. He will do the dishes.
Right.
And that's just not how people work.
Right.
We're married to people, not robots.
Right.
And
Right.
it might be nice to have that list of rules, but
Mm-hmm.
what it often does, and what we've seen in these books, is it takes women and
Mm-hmm.
women's, God-given right to be seen
Mm-hmm.
as daughters of Christ,
Amen.
and it turns them into sexual vending machines
That's right.
to numb their husband's unwanted emotions,
Mm-hmm.
right? Your husband is being tempted by porn, just have sex. Your husband is grumpy around the house, have you given him enough sex? Your husband
Right.
doesn't want to spend enough time with the kids. Well, how can you really expect him to want to put in time with the family when you're not putting in time with him?
Mm-hmm.
Because he's a person.
Right. Right. And he's part of the family.
And he is.
Right.
And yeah, and I just hope that we're able to free not only women, but also their husbands to
Mm-hmm.
understand that you don't need to be ruled by this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This can be a gift, not something that is a power struggle
Right. I think
or a
part of
blame
that
game.
is feeding into the lie that and this is a woman thing, we
Yeah.
are responsible for somebody else's emotions, right? And
Yes.
so it's our job to make sure everybody's happy, right? Oh, our
Yes.
kids are unhappy. Well, we got to make them happy. Our husband's unhappy. Well, what do we do to make our husband happy? We give him sex. We make him dinner. What do we do, right? And
Exactly.
so it's our job to make sure we're the clown. We got to make everybody happy. We got to make everything balanced. And so what do we do? That's our job. But
Exactly.
I love the next sentence, or the next little quip in your book. It says, in healthy marriages, and let's just talk about healthy marriages and healthy sex real quick. In healthy marriages, sometimes the solution really is, I'm talking about healthy marriages here,
Mhm.
really is that you both need to have some sex.
Yeah.
But sex, this is real. I need my listeners to listen to this. But
Mhm.
sex cannot fix selfishness or laziness. It cannot fix an abusive relationship. It cannot cure an affair or porn use or lust. It is dangerous to tell a reader to have sex with an abusive person. If you are in an abusive relationship where you feel as if you have to walk on eggshells to avoid setting off your spouse and you feel unsafe, please call an abuse hotline. Having sex cannot fix serious issues in your relationship. Boy, I could read that 20 times and I still feel like it couldn't get through to everybody who's listening.
I know, and that's just so sad, right? And I think that this comes down to, for women, a really big thing for us, and it's what you were just talking about, is understand that our identity does not come from how other people feel about us.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
our identity as wives, as mothers, as women, and as people
Mm-hmm.
is not about how people feel about us.
Mm-hmm.
It's about what Christ did for us,
Mm-hmm.
and that, I think that's where a lot of this has come from, is we've skewed that. We've turned wives and women into something that is the way that men get what they want. And I'm not saying all men, I'm saying unhealthy men. Is the way we're seeing women is as, you know, your sexual methadone, or as, you know, your sex vending machine. I mean, we just hear that from women all the time. Like, I feel like a sex vending machine, you know, insert 2 coins here and bam, sex comes out, right? Like they, in their marriages, that's how they feel like they're being used, right?
Yeah. So
and
there was I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, when we see our identity in terms of, you know, what we're able to provide sexually versus who Christ has told us we are, we can start just feeling so worthless if we're quote unquote failing in this way. You know, if we haven't had sex for a week and a half because we've been sick, you know, I'm such a horrible wife. I'm such a terrible person. You know, my husband must be so mad at me. You've been sick for a week and a half. Yeah, but you've been sick for a week and a half. Why isn't the husband bending over backwards thinking, man, you know, I'm so sad I didn't do all the dishes for her for a week and a half because she's been so sick. No marriage book is saying that we found, you know.
Don't you feel bad when you're sick? I've got to get up and take care of the kids. I got to get up and fix dinner. I got to get up and take care of my husband. Yeah, we feel that way, don't we? Right.
We do. And what I would just love to see is authors and pastors and counselors and small group leaders and friends and mothers and daughters, everyone just speaking up and saying, you matter.
Right.
Just point blank. You matter.
It's okay to be sick. It's okay to rest. It's okay to,
It's okay to not have everything together. And it's okay to not live up to arbitrary expectations that were never put on you by God.
Yeah, there's a really there's a quip that learned early on in counseling, and it was, women use sex to get love, and men use love to get sex. And it really is true. You know, we learn, especially in our culture early on, that, you know, women, and it is a cultural thing, that if we, you know, if we want love, we have the power of sex to try to get it, right? And men learned, hey, if I want to get sex, I can use love as a fishing pole to get it, right? With women, I'm just saying, it's a cultural thing. And haven't we as Christians learned to embrace that?
What I would love, because I think it's interesting you say it's a cultural thing, because I think that I'm, first of all, just to super show how young I am the last millennial year, just so everyone knows. And I think my generation is seeing it very differently. Because the men that we talk to a lot on the blog, and the people I know in my life, and just people who we talk to among my generation, there tends to be a lot more blurred lines in this, where both genders feel love and sex for themselves. Like, you want love and you want sex, versus having this different power dynamic. And I would love to see our Christian culture be able to embrace both, where we don't have to see it as one has to lead to the other, as much as we can see how in a healthy marriage, they both exist. And there's not as much of a struggle of, am I getting enough love, so I'm going to try to get sex, or am I giving enough love to get what I really want, which is sex? I would love to see it where we have a more holistic understanding of sexuality, where, you know, we can feel loved and so express that in sex.
Right. But you were raised in a Christian home with godly examples, godly parents, and a parents who had a really healthy relationship, right? And that's, I'm not sure you really understand how unique that is, right? I mean,
I'm talking about my undergrad in psychology.
Oh,
we talked
okay.
about it at the university. Sorry, to be clear.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was like, that is so unusual. Yeah. You know, I'm more your mother's age, and I come from, so I'm 54. And if you look at, my generation and older, it was so, before the Me Too movement, it was just such a cultural thing for men to be able to slap women on the butt and
I know
and be able to say, you know, off color sexual remarks, right? And so and so it wasn't anything to objectify women sexually. And so even in the church, for men to make snide remarks about women sexually,
Well, and
and
that's what we're talking about here, where
right,
it's like, how come that culture of like objectifying women has creeped into our books? How
right,
did we let it creep into our
exactly.
pulpits? How did we let this happen? Because then you have women who are growing up in this culture where they are being objectified. And it happens today too, obviously. I'm just in a larger cultural zeitgeist idea. I think that they're becoming a little bit more entangled, which I actually think is healthy in a lot of marriages. But I think that when you have girls, especially who grow up and they're told from day one, in essence, like your body is to be used, whether you like it or not.
Right,
And then our books tell them your body is to be used by your husband, whether
right,
you like it or not. Is it
right.
any wonder that women are struggling to enjoy sex?
Right. We just had a pastor within the last 30 days who had asked to step down. I don't know if you heard it in the news.
The Missouri pastor?
Yes, who was
Yep.
asked to step down because he was showed a picture of former First Lady Melania Trump and telling women you need to be a trophy wife.
Yeah.
He was objectifying women. Of course, he wasn't a trophy husband. I just point that out. But that's what he was saying. We needed to be trophy wives and not butch, as was his words. I mean, that's from the pulpit.
And that's just, again, it just comes back to this idea that we have trained women. When you hear about that Bill and Susie story in The Act of Marriage, and you hear about the woman who was told she had to have sex with the husband who was making her afraid and made her kid leave the family because of his abuse. When we hear these kinds of stories, and then you hear this pastor, what they're all saying to women is your worth and your identity is in what you can sexually give to men.
Right.
Your worth and your identity is what you have to offer sexually. And that is not biblical. And that is not the voice of Christ.
Right.
Yeah. And what I hope is that these women who are hearing these messages, who are reading these books, I hope that The Great Sex Rescue brings hope and freedom from that. Because we talked to so many women and there are so many hopeful stories in this book. It's not just negative examples.
Right.
There are so many hopeful stories of women who have come through the other side, often with their husband's help, because their husband showed them what it was to see them through the eyes of Christ, to see them as whole people, to treat them as humans worthy of dignity and respect.
And I will point out in your book, you do give examples of a lot of husbands that were just lost.
Yeah.
You know what? I didn't know how to do foreplay. I didn't know how to have sex. I just jumped in bed and I thought that's what I was supposed to do.
Exactly.
The 2-3 minute thing. And I didn't know that I didn't know she wasn't having fun,
Exactly. Yep, precisely.
So,
a lot of couples go into marriage with very little sexual education.
Right. I mean, we're just surprised, oh, I was supposed to do that. Oh, I didn't know. She never said anything.
Yeah, exactly. And how are they supposed to know? The ideal for Christian couples is that you get married with very little sexual experience.
Right. Right.
So how are you supposed to know unless you're told? And all these books a lot of them don't give a lot of examples. There are some first of all, I do want to say there are some books that did really, really well, right? We always say The Gift of Sex by the Penners did fantastic on our rubric. Highly recommend that book. And it's really good for like a very specific kind of nitty gritty, here's how sex works.
Right.
Kind of example. But most of the best sellers people are given at bridal showers, like Love and Respect, even books like the For Women Only and For Men Only series, like those kinds of books. They don't actually tell you a lot about how sex works. All they say is you have to do it. And that to us is really problematic when we have this huge orgasm gap we talked about last time, where women are not orgasming as much as men, but they're told you have to keep doing it even if it doesn't feel good.
I'll tell you, a friend of mine went to a Love and Respect conference and she said, I can't even look at those words.
Yeah.
She said, I can't, it was so appalling to me what I was taught. Yeah. She said, I can't even look at those words. It was just...
and this kind of ties in what we're saying. So can I tell you something really quickly about the Love and Respect thing? It ties into this idea of women's identity. So Love and Respect by Emerson Eggerichs. The whole premise is based on one question in a survey done by Shanti Felton, where they surveyed men and asked, would you prefer to be alone and unloved or feel inadequate and disrespected? To feel alone and unloved or inadequate and disrespected. And something like 73% of men chose that they would prefer to feel alone and unloved versus inadequate and disrespected. So, therefore, Eggerichs wrote this whole book, assuming that men want respect and women want love. But do you notice anything missing?
They didn't survey women.
They didn't ask women. And not only that, people actually did ask women later. And you know what? They answer at the same rates as men. Women also would choose to be alone and unloved at around comparable rates to men. And the thing is, we have this whole theology, which is so focused on what do men think. And they literally don't ask women. And I hope that this whole conversation we're starting now, where we surveyed 22,000 women, we surveyed 22,000 women, and we didn't just ask them one question. We asked them 130 questions to figure out what is it that's making your sex life great or terrible or just kind of blah. You know, we were trying to figure out what exactly it was. We're hoping that by getting into a culture where it's not that men's opinions don't matter, but it's that both people are elevated and humanized versus
where all anybody's ever done is ask men.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and even when they do ask women, there's a lot of problems with the books where they talk to women as well, because frankly, the books where they talk to only men sell better.
Wow.
Yeah. And there's a lot of reasons that might be, but we're just hoping that we can tip the scale a bit and just help couples have the information so that both members of the relationship can be honored and loved and respected.
You know, that's really interesting to me because women are the ones who buy the most books.
Well, that's exactly it, because they buy books wanting to understand their husbands. Right?
Wow. That's interesting, isn't it?
Yep.
There's as we move on, we talk about, or you guys talk about, that the one of the things that books focus on the most is that a man just needs physical release. And whether it's intentional or not, by describing sexual need in terms of physical release instead of intimacy, many women let men have intercourse and feel proud of themselves for doing their wifely duty while their lonely husbands are left desperate for connection. Is that really true that men want?
Oh, we get these emails all the time from husbands who are emailing us pleading, like, I have been married for 5 years and my wife hates sex and I'm honestly trying. I am trying to help her. I'm trying to do foreplay. I'm trying to talk to her. I'm trying to open communication, and she shuts it down. And then she just says, I'm okay, just go ahead. And she gets angry if he tries to slow down. And so he's like, well, I don't know what to do. And so he just has sex and it's over in a few minutes. And he just feels so empty because men are not these base creatures who just want to use you like a receptacle. You know, sexually healthy men crave intimacy and attachment, just like how women do. They do. You know, men are emotional creatures too. And I think that we know that as women, right? Like, I'm a mother of a son, okay? I have a little baby boy. And my little baby boy, he loves hugs. He loves kisses. He wants to cuddle. He wants to know that mommy and daddy are there and that people are watching him and we're proud of him. And I just wonder when it is that we start thinking that men become emotionally unavailable. Because it's definitely not true when they're kids. It's definitely not true as teenagers. Have you ever read teenage boys' poetry? Oh my word.
Yeah.
Very emotional.
You're right.
You know, it's definitely not when we're dating. Men are very emotionally available while we're dating. So when is it that we start to think that men don't have emotional needs? You know, and what I'm worried is that we've actually systematically trained a whole generation of both men and women to learn to sublimate men's emotional feelings directly into sex, where the only thing that is manly to feel is sexual release or lust or the sexual desire or kind of that tension. And everything else has been called, you know, feminine. And it's like, well, I mean, David and Jonathan were very, very like friendly with each other. They're very emotional,
Very
honest.
emotional with one another, right?
Yeah. You know, David was a man. He took down Goliath, for Pete's sake. But have you read the Psalms?
Right.
Like,
Right.
and I'm just
Right.
hoping that we can start to realize that when we as women see our husbands and think, oh, men only want one thing, and then they just give them the one thing,
Right.
we've actually reduced our husbands to something that they were never meant to be. You know, we have actually taken something from our husbands as well, which is the gift of emotional intimacy,
Right.
and the gift of closeness, and the gift of knowing you. You know, your husband married you. He loves you. He wants to know you. And if he's not treating you like that, like if there's a woman listening who's thinking like, yeah, but I would love to have emotional intimacy, but frankly, he's not meeting me there, then have those conversations. And maybe this is a time to bring in a counselor, you know, bring in a therapist, maybe talk about these things. But you are not doomed to be a sexual receptacle, but also you're not doomed to a sex life that's just a to-do list. And that's not what your husband should want either.
You know what? When you were talking about, you know, women and their children and boys having emotions, let's talk about how pornography changes your emotions.
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
it, you know, you can have a young boy who has all kinds of emotions, and then you know, today pornography is, you know, you give a kid a cell phone. Let me tell you, they have access in their bedroom. They go to their room at night, and you go to bed. They have access to a whole new world, and
Completely.
so you know, pornography changes your whole brain, and so you know that changes your emotional structure entirely. And men are, you know, men are involved with pornography in a whole new way today than they were, you know, 10, 15, 20 years ago. um,
I'm so glad you brought that up, because you're
yeah.
so right. And that's something that we found, and not just we found, but there's so much peer-reviewed research on this too, right? This is a huge area of study right now where porn can really stunt emotional development. You know, so what happens is, say a boy becomes addicted to pornography. It's happening younger and younger. It's just horrifying. But at the age of 11, okay? So he's still a child, and he gets addicted to pornography, and he doesn't have the coping mechanisms to figure out what it is that he just saw. But all he knows is that he wants to see more of it, because that's a normal response, you know? And then, you know, maybe it's 15 years later and he's 26 and he's getting married, because that's about a relatively normal age to get married. And he's been battling porn for 15 years now. And he, since age 11, anytime he's had a negative emotion, severe stress, feelings of loneliness, feelings of self-hatred, what has he done? He's turned to pornography.
That's right.
So at every point when he could have learned healthy coping skills, when he could have learned emotional maturity, it's just been numbed by porn. And so what happens when he gets married? You know,
That's
for a
right.
lot of men, this is how sex doesn't feel emotional, you know, because sex is just about numbing. It's not about experiencing. You know, it's something you do. It's not something that you do together.
And there was two things that we talked about the other day on the show, and I feel like we need to point them out again. One was, I mentioned that, and my listeners, you're going to be shocked with this, is that I did an interview the other day with someone who specializes in pornography, and one of the things he mentioned is that we have 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old boys who struggle with erectile dysfunction.
It's insane how much this can affect people.
Yes, and then you mentioned, or you or your mom or Joanna mentioned that that with, you know, a lot of times women are blamed for oh, you're blamed for your husband's pornography addiction because you're not having enough sex with him, or his affair, because you're not having enough sex with him. But what didn't your research show that actually this most cases his pornography addiction started way before you ever came along?
Exactly. Joanna did a survey of 3,000. I believe it was just over 3,000 men, and asked them a lot of incredibly personal questions, including about porn use, and found, yes, that for men who are around age 40 or younger, pornography use was much more likely to have predated the marriage.
Mhm.
Obviously, for those who are older, it was actually more likely to happen during marriage. But you know what's the biggest predictive measure is actually the internet.
Mm.
So it's just that some people happened to get married before internet pornography.
Right.
It's not about the wife.
Hmm.
Pornography is not about you.
And we knew that, but
Yeah.
thankfully we have that measure to show
Yeah.
that. Right.
And it does feel sometimes for a lot of men
Right.
who are honorable men who are trying so hard to battle this very big thing that they're dealing with, that maybe they've been dealing with for 7, 8, 9, 10 years
Mhm.
by the time they get married. You know, we tell a story of, I believe we call them Jared and Melissa in the book,
Mhm.
about Jared and Melissa, where, you know, there's this young couple who gets married, and Jared's been battling this porn addiction for years, and he gets married and he thinks, now that I'm getting married and I can finally actually have sex, at last I can be free.
Right.
And that's, I think, what a lot of guys, that's their heart cry. They're not
Right.
trying to, you know, they're not trying to use their wives.
Now
like
I can
sex
have
is
all
not
the
for
sex
them.
I want now.
No,
Yeah.
they're desperate for freedom. You know, and I
Right.
think, and all they've been told is when you get married, you can have all the sex you want. And if you have all the sex you want, why would you ever want porn? Sex is so much better
Right.
than porn. That is a lie, because sex and porn are not the same thing.
Right. It's a
And so Jared gets married.
right.
Exactly. Jared gets married. And for the first little bit, things are easy because this is new. Because at this
Mhm.
point, sex with a person is new.
Mhm.
Right. And it's exciting, and you're exploring, and you're on the honeymoon, you're having sex like all the time, and you get home from the honeymoon and it keeps going. But then real life starts to creep back in,
Mhm.
and you stop having sex as much, or just sex starts to become normal.
Or you have a baby.
Yeah. Well, even before that, like for a lot of couples, even just a couple
Mhm.
months into marriage, the porn starts creeping back,
Mhm.
because what was exciting and new is now normal. And what
Right.
porn does to a lot of men is it reduces sex into something that is looking for the next high.
Right.
It's not an intimate personal
Right.
experience. It's about getting that next level.
Right.
And so when your normal sex in marriage doesn't feel next level anymore,
Mhm.
what do? A lot of times you turn back to porn. And that can feel like your spouse just did something to you, right? Because she stopped having sex 5 times a week with me, and now I'm watching
Mhm.
porn again. So it must be because she's not having sex.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we don't realize a lot of the time that no, it's because you brought a bad
Mhm.
habit.
Mhm.
You brought a compulsion. You brought a negative coping strategy into your marriage that was numbed for a while,
Mhm.
but it was still there. And
Mhm.
it's not the fault of the wife that
Mhm.
she can't live up to the expectations of porn
Mhm.
or to the call of porn, because she was never meant to do that. That's
Mhm.
not what sex is. Sex is meant to be
You told
more.
a story in the book, and I don't remember the woman's name, but she tried to keep up with porn.
Yeah.
Do you remember that story? Talk about that story, because I think a lot of women try to do that. She kept sending her husband pictures of her. He was on the road. Do you remember that story?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember exactly where it is in the book. But yeah, we've had a lot of.
She sent pictures of herself. He always wanted pictures, and so she tried to put herself in different positions. And do you remember that
And the
story?
issue with pornography is that, I think what she learned was that the issue with pornography was that you can't substitute
Right.
something that is meant to just continuously up the ante.
That's what she was doing. Her husband always, he was on the road, and she was constantly taking pictures of herself naked and in different positions and putting herself in these, and he was constantly demanding more and more and more and more and more. And she was doing it because she didn't want him to look at porn, I think. And she couldn't keep up with his appetite. And what she basically learned was that, you know what? He's just replaced me with porn. I'm not special, right?
Yeah.
I'm not his wife, and we're having this intimate sexual experience. I'm just a thing.
And that's exactly it. That's the difference right there, right? Is
Right.
pornographic. You can have pornographic sex with your marriage partner.
That's right. And
You
she
can
realized
have
that.
pornographic, lustful, objectifying sex with the person you're married to.
Yeah.
And likewise, you can have someone who is having objectifying and dehumanizing sex with you, even if he gave you a wedding ring.
And she
And
said
that's what I
that.
want women to
Yeah.
know.
And
Yeah.
she said, you know, when she told him I'm done,
Yep.
he became irate.
Yeah.
He became irate. And it wasn't, you know, in a healthy marriage, you don't become irate when your partner draws a boundary, right?
No, and that's exactly it. It's when we have this entitlement mindset with sex, because this is so easy to slip into, right? Because this is something where you're the only person who your spouse can get this from.
Right.
So it can
Supposedly,
become very
in a
easy.
biblical
Yeah,
marriage. Yeah.
in a biblical manner.
Healthy.
Yes.
Yeah.
In assuming that there is nothing
Right.
like, adulterous going on,
Right,
you are
right.
the only person who can meet this need, right? Who
Right.
can meet this drive. And so you can start to feel kind of entitled. It's like, well, I married you, so this is mine now, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you don't stop needing consent, or you don't need to stop respecting someone or stop treating them like a human being simply because you gave them a wedding ring. And men can do this and women can do this. And yeah, sorry, my
That's okay.
dog is going. We're just real life here, right?
That's right.
So,
we'll just pretend like their baby's crying in the sermon.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. My baby's crying in the sermon. But yeah, I think what I just want couples to understand is that even if you're married, it's not okay.
Let's talk about Audrey Assad and her female pornography issues.
Yes, that's something that's never ever talked about in these books, right? So we talk about porn, we talk about it's literally called Every Man's Battle, okay? There's literally a whole book called Every Man's Battle.
But not every woman's battle.
There is a book called Every Woman's Battle.
Yes, but not on this issue, right? Yeah.
But it's not focused on pornography. Right. And I will say that this is something where, again, because of the internet age, women are starting to use porn more and more and more. Sexual brokenness is not monopolized by one gender. I will say that. You know, sexual brokenness comes all the way around.
Right. And this is a story that Joanna told, and she said, Audrey Assad, whose hymn collection, Inheritance, got me through both my infertility journey and my miscarriage, has been open about her experience with pornography and the deep sense of shame she felt as a female evangelical porn user.
Yeah. And that's just it. When we see this as a man's issue, first of all, you have these girls who are already facing something that makes them feel really dirty and really broken. And they think, what's wrong with me that I'm struggling with this? I know this is wrong. I know this is bad for me. I know this is gross. You know, I don't want to be turned on by this. I don't want to want this. And then at all the youth rallies, what are we told? Boys are visual and girls are not. So you need to cover up because boys are tempted by pornography. And you want to make sure you're not triggering anything in them. And then you have this girl who's sitting here who has this secret shame of hers. And she thinks, I'm even grosser than I thought.
I have to tell you, I read every young girl's or every young woman's battle with my 10-year-old daughter. Or she's 12 now. She was 10 at the time. And I read it with her because I just felt like, hey, you know, I want her to. And then I read your book.
Yeah.
And then I thought back about what that book said. And basically it said, you know, your body's a temptation to boys. Your body's a temptation to boys. Your body's a temptation to boys. And I had to go back to her recently and say, you know what, Isabella, I'm sorry.
Wow.
I'm going to choke up here.
Yeah. I
am so sorry. But you know what? Your body's not a temptation to boys. Your body's a gift for your husband. You know, your body, you know, and my daughter's probably the most modest child I've ever met. I know. And I remember complimenting her on that a few months ago about, I'm so proud of you. You're so modest. And she says, Mom, you scared me into modesty.
Oh, no.
You know, and, you know, probably because I wasn't raised that way, but she, you know, and I thought about what she's, when her saying that, but she, but, you know, you know, but that's what that book is about. Your body is a threat to men.
And that's what so many of us are told growing up, right? I grew up with that message. I really did. I even remember I used to read Brio magazines when I was little. I inhaled them and I loved them. And they taught me a lot of really great stuff. They really did. But they also told me that my body was a walking temptation for Satan to use against boys. And
Yeah.
that's almost word for word from an article I found again just a month ago that I read when I was 12. And these are the things that we're telling girls, but we're also not telling them that you're also a sexual being. And so if you struggle
And that
with
it's
sexual
okay to be a
sin,
sexual being.
it is, but also if you struggle with sexual sin, you're not more broken than boys who struggle with sexual sin.
Yeah.
You're not more broken. You're not a mistake.
Yeah.
Your body's not a mistake. Your desires are not a mistake. They can be perverted sometimes by sin. We all can have that happen.
Mm-hmm.
But you were created to be a sexual being, and God wants to redeem that and wants to use that for something beautiful. Even if the world wants to use it for something ugly. And that's the message that I want to give if I have daughters someday, is just that you were created to experience the fullness of God's passion and God's love and his just honestly acceptance. Because that's what sex is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a passionate embrace of who you are as a person. And pornography doesn't do that.
Well, and let's talk about masturbation amongst girls. I mean, let's just be honest here.
Let's just do it.
All right, let's go there. And I think that is, everybody who knows me knows that I'm really blunt and talk about stuff. So, that I think that is a big secret amongst young girls in the church. Because I remember right after I got saved, I belonged to a startup church in Nashville, Tennessee, and there were many artists, that went there. And so I became friends with many artists and Christian artists. And I remember several of us girls were sitting around. I was a songwriter. I'd just gotten out of school, was counseling. We were all sitting around one day while someone else performed at a Christian event. And we were all Christians. I was a baby Christian. We were all talking about masturbation. Just a few girls.
Just girl talk.
And I was surprised at how I mean, I've always been blunt, so I don't mind talking about it. And I was surprised at how many of these Christian girls had this struggle.
Yeah.
And had since they were preteens, teens.
Yeah.
I remember that conversation so vividly because you just don't think about that. And since that time, I've met with my kids have gone to Christian schools their whole life. My daughter's 12, my son's 10. I've counseled many parents and many young girls who have struggled with that. It's kind of the untalked about secret.
Well, and we can't talk about it though, can we? Because if we talk about it, we have to acknowledge that girls are sexual beings too, and then everything else falls apart. Because it's all this house of cards, right? And this is what we really realize looking at it. It's all this house of cards that's predicated on boys and girls are fundamentally different sexually, which means that boys have needs and girls don't.
That's right. Boys can have wet dreams. Right.
Yeah,
boys can have wet dreams.
But we don't talk about why. We don't talk about why girls wake up and they feel very, very aroused, or why girls wake up and they have discharge in their underwear that they don't normally have. It's like, well, because actually girls orgasm in their sleep too.
Right. Or why girls or why, parents walk in and they say, oh, I saw my daughter rubbing herself against the sheets on her stomach. And so I just slammed the door shut and walked away.
Oh, I have a funny story about one thing that I always tell parents when they say like, oh, my kids are masturbating, I don't know what I'm doing. I was a lifeguard for years in high school, and one of the conversations, because I was kind of my mom wrote about sex, so I was one who always had to talk to everyone about sex, right? So at 16 years old, I was one who had all the conversations with the parents, having to explain to them to have conversations with their girls about why we can't straddle the jets at the pool. Because that was inevitably where the 7 or 8 year old girls would end up.
Right.
Because there was no shame. It wasn't a sexual thing, but our bodies experience pleasure from this area, right?
Right.
But what happens is we kind of over sexualize a lot of girls' bodies in a way, and then we almost under sexualize, but over predatorized boys.
Right.
I know predatorized isn't a word, but I struggle to find the appropriate word for it, where if a girl, at 5 years old touches herself once, everyone thinks she's going to be a sexual deviant.
Right.
Right? It's like, no, this is perfectly normal. It's not actually masturbation.
Right.
It's just exploring her body. Whereas when a boy starts touching himself 5 years old, oh, what can you expect with boys? Always have their hands in their diapers.
Right.
Right. And this is the conversation we need to change, right? Because we need to understand what's healthy and what's true. And what is based on this house of cards that boys are sexual and girls aren't. Because what happens your whole life is girls are told this is for boys and you give it. Right? Or this is for boys. And if you struggle with it, well, you're struggling with a boy's issue, not a girl's issue.
Right.
Or this is something that boys need. And so when you're married, you'll need to give it. And they're raised their whole life and they get married and they're told, I guess sex is a gift, and they really want to believe it. But then they get married and maybe they don't orgasm for the first few months. You know, or maybe sex is only taking 3 minutes and they don't have enough sexual education to understand that it's supposed to take a little bit longer than 3 minutes. And then they start to wonder, am I broken, or is this just how it's supposed to be?
Yeah.
And we want to equip women to have more information so they can know you're not broken and this is not how it's supposed to be.
Right. Exactly. Well, and I know women that I mentor that are married or in their late 20s and 30s that have never had an orgasm, and in their marriage, they've been married 5-10 years. Yep. And they say that I just think this is the way it's supposed to be. And I'm like, no.
No. You know, God created women with the physical capacity to orgasm.
That's right.
He gave women
a clitoris. That's its whole purpose.
That's it. You know, men do not have an organ that only pleasure is its goal. You know,
that's right.
Men's organ. You do stuff to it for long enough and it will help you make a baby. Right? It's whereas for women, you can do all sorts of clitoral stuff and there's no other purpose for it other than just pure pleasure. Additionally, God did create women to have multiple orgasms.
Yeah.
Which means in a marriage, actually, for every one orgasm a man has, it's not really an upper limit to how many a woman can have.
That's right.
You know, but somehow we've gotten it all backwards and we've said women aren't sexual. And I just don't see that in the physiology of how God made us.
I see a book in your future for young girls.
That's actually the next one we're hoping to write. Yeah, we're in contract already, so we're going to be working on it.
That's great. They need that. They so need that. You know, I took my daughter through The Passport of Purity, which was great.
That's what I did too.
Yeah, it was a great book, but it didn't talk about necessarily the healthy aspect of it. And it just talked about the birds and the bees, as you know, stuck to the basic, and it was great hands-on stuff, but it doesn't talk about the healthy and all that, aspect of it. So I'm looking forward to your are you going to do the boy part too, or just the girl part?
We did. Well, I will say for any parents who are interested, we already have puberty courses available for mothers and daughters and fathers and sons, or we also have a one for single moms with sons, and we're working on one for single dads with daughters as well.
Great.
But it's called The Whole Story, and it helps you walk through not only the biological mechanisms of sex, but also the design for sex that's about more than just here's sex, now don't do it.
Okay.
It's got a lot of good information. And so I'm happy to connect your listeners with that if they're interested.
Great.
It's just what we're hoping with this book, with our courses, with everything is just like what you said, is to expand the conversation beyond just here is how a baby is made. Now don't do it until you're married, or the fear tactics or the ideas of your sexuality belongs to someone else. It's like, no, your sexuality can be shared with your spouse, but you still have autonomy.
Right.
You still matter. You still matter.
Right.
And we need these conversations about consent, about, boundaries, about respect, even in Christian marriages, where we're not having multiple partners. It still matters.
Right.
And I think that matters as young as 10, 11, 12, because
Amen.
That's when you start to build your foundation of what sex is supposed to look like. And we need to turn it into something beautiful and take it back from our pornified culture and take it back from teachings in marriage books that frankly sound more like pornography than they do like how Christ would talk to his daughters. And I'm hoping that we can just set a lot of couples free and we can show a better way forward, a way that looks more like Christ, forgetting what is behind and straining towards what is ahead. Let us race after the prize for which Christ Jesus has called us heavenward. Let's just run towards that and forget everything else. And that's really the way to find healing.
Awesome. One of the things, I know we've gone over our time. One of the things I could talk to you forever. And you know that one of the things we talked about, I really want to make sure we cover before we go, is, of course, the Great Sex Rescue talks about ways that you and your husband can work together and find pleasure with one another, and that's great. But what do you suggest for the woman who is in a marriage where her husband just doesn't care? I mean, what can she do if he just doesn't want to pleasure her? He doesn't care if he's just all about himself and doesn't want to invest in helping her have an orgasm beyond just do it yourself.
Yeah. Here's the thing. We talk a lot about how you're not supposed to deprive your spouse sexually, right?
That's what the Bible says.
And so, yes, but what does deprivation mean? Right? We're also not supposed to enable sin in a marriage. And if someone is using you sexually without even a consideration for your pleasure, or without treating you with dignity, because that is not treating you with dignity. If they're using you so they can get released, but they're not even willing to try for you, you do not need to enable that, because that is objectifying, and that is actually lust. It's not love. And lust can happen in marriages too. And I want to say that if you are consistently left hanging, if you are married to a spouse who is not taking your pleasure seriously, who is not treating you like an equal partner in the sexual encounter, you are the one being deprived.
And abandoned. That's abandonment.
It is utter neglect. You do not need to enable selfishness in your marriage. It is not you saying that you're not going to have sex if what you say is, listen, I want a mutual, satisfying, fulfilling sex life for both of us that encompasses what God intended for sex.
Amen.
I am no longer willing to be used as a sexual receptacle when my feelings and my experience is not considered. If you want to have sex, we need to change how it happens so that it is a pleasurable experience for both of us. Not just you. If you said that, you would not be refusing to have sex. You would be refusing to enable a pornographic mindset around sex. And you would instead be saying, the boundary I am setting is that I am willing to have sex how God designed it, not how porn designed it.
Amen. Wow. There you go. And all that's doing, ladies, is setting a boundary, or men. All that's doing is setting a boundary. Listen to what she said. She said, you're not refusing to have sex. You're refusing to have pornographic sex. Or inappropriate sex. You're saying, I want biblical sex, not pornographic sex.
And there are times when it is okay to take sex off the table. If you are in an abusive relationship,
amen.
If you are being mistreated, if there is unrepentant porn use, if there is a risk of there being multiple partners and your health is at risk, anything at all that is crossing that severe boundary, you are not in the wrong for taking sex off the table. If you are struggling with health or postpartum stuff, and you're not going to be able to go back the 6 weeks after the birth that you expected, you're not hurting your husband by saying, I'm not willing to have painful sex right now.
That's right.
I'm not willing to do things that actually put my life at risk. We get messages from women who say, well, I'm supposed to be on bed rest and my doctor says I'm not allowed to have sex, so I might go into premature labor, but here we are. No.
I agree.
No.
Yeah.
Understand that there are times it's okay to take it off the table entirely, and that's not you refusing your spouse. That is you standing up for what is just and what is right. But if you're in a marriage where you're like, no, I'd like to be having sex. I would just like for it to be orgasmic. I'd like for him to care about me. I'd like to be seen. Draw that boundary, and stand firm, because you matter. And that's what this all comes down to. Both of you matter, not just one.
And I will just say, if you are in a Christian marriage and you're an abusive marriage and you are looking for a resource, you can go to leslievernick.com. Wonderful resources. You like Leslie Vernick? Yeah, I do too. Leslie. I've known her personally 25 years. She's wonderful. LESLIEVERNICK.com. incredible resources. I can't
Yeah.
recommend her enough. I had an interview with her probably 3-4 weeks ago. We'll be publishing her interview real quick, shortly after your guys' is probably in April, May. Uh, and her books are great too. You want to follow up. But this book is The Great Sex Rescue by Sheila Ray Gregoire, beautiful Rebecca Gregoire Lindenback, and their statistician, Joanna Sawaski. Incredible book. I highly recommend it. Like I said, it is the book of the decade, at least. This book, if you, I think everybody should own it. I think that it's a great gift to give anybody who is getting married, anybody who is a young adult, anybody. I mean, this is the book I'm reading with, I'm going to read to my daughter, not right now, she's 12, but when she's a little older. But it is a great gift. I have probably, I'm not kidding you, bought 20 copies and given them away. I'm going to buy more. I have people in mind to buy more copies. If you have a women's event coming up, these are the people you want to speak at your event. www.authorlesliemontgomery.com. I will have information on my articles tab of how to get a hold of these women. Rebecca, thank you again for coming and visiting with us and sharing your wonderful wisdom on the topic.
Thank you so much again for having me.
You bet. You guys, thank you for joining Truth and Grace. As always, keep your eye on the prize and your feet on the rock. And until next time, God bless you.